Welcome back. I am Shelley Pryor. I'm a realistic watercolorist from Ontario, Canada, and every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, that's Toronto time, I do a live demonstration. Last week, we were painting this adorable little white dog, and everybody wanted to see it finished, so we're going to continue this week. If you missed that first one, the link to that first video is underneath this one, so you can watch this one and then go back and catch the beginning. But I'm going to do a little recap. So here's our little dog that we were working on, and I didn't get it finished. I still want to do a little bit more on the fur, and that's where I'm going to do a recap. So one of the tools that I found most helpful for this was to use a flat synthetic brush. Synthetic because it will not hold like an overly a lot of water. I want it to hold some, but I don't want it to be overly wet. So I'm going to take a paper towel here and I'm bringing this on screen so that you can see as I blot, because that's an important part, is knowing when to take off the excess water from your brush before painting. Now what I did with this blotted brush, just a quick tap tap, is I brushed over a spot before painting into it with just a little bit of paint. Now I don't have my paints mixed up right now. Let's recap the colors we used. I created a purple with my cobalt and permanent rose. Okay, so that makes a nice strong purple. Let's get a little more blue in this. So kind of a middle of the road purple. And then I wanted it more gray because of course that's far too purple. So I used a little neutral tint, which grayed it down, but it's still, the color purple is still pretty dominant. So let's neutralize it. I'm going to take a little bit of raw sienna. Raw sienna is that kind of golden color here. And sparingly, only a tiny bit, put it in. If you put in too much, you will make a really muddy looking color. So we're putting together a lot of primary colors here. So we have a blue, we have a red, and now I've introduced a yellow. So you have to be very careful about the ratios there. So now I've got this sort of, a little bit of an eggplant color, I guess. And that sounds like a weird color to be using, but it is kind of in the taupe family. All right, so now that I have my color figured out, I'm once again going to take my clean flat brush, blot, brush an area, pick up a little bit of paint. I don't want to pick up too much. If I pick up too much, I will flood the paper. So on a wet surface, you really have to use it sparingly. Let's test this out. I'm going to take a little off my brush because I don't want too much here. I think it's still a little bit too purple, so I'm going to put a little bit more of the raw sienna in there. I'm trying to replicate what I had last week. That's better. By the way, I don't know if you can see this, but I made some notes about my color combination on my tape. That's a very useful tip, by the way, if you are, combining your own colors. Not if you write down mine, you might not have my colors, but write down whatever combination you decide on, and then you will always have a reference. I'm not going to lose the tape. I'll lose the whole painting if I lose the tape. So let's just get a little bit more texture in here, and by putting it in on this damp surface instead of a dry surface, it will give me a much softer looking dog. Otherwise, all the brush marks that you put in will be very stiff looking, and it will look a little bit more like porcupine quills than soft fur. So I'm following the directional flow of the fur as well. Trying to keep an eye on the chat here as well. It's a good thing you guys tell me when I don't have sound. I will I'll edit that out when for the replays. So all right, so I'm creating the texture with very, very soft strokes. I can even zoom in a little bit more so that you can see this a little more up close and personal. So, but the one thing I really want to be careful of on this left-hand side, because this is where all the light's coming from, I don't want to put my shadows too heavy there. Keep it nice and light and gentle. You can see how subtle I have created this fur here. So this blotted brush is so useful for allowing me to continue painting. I always found that to be such a frustrating thing. Is, you know, you're in the middle of painting, it's like, oh, it's starting to dry. Now I'm going to have to wait for it to dry. Then I have to wet it again. But this little bit of a damp brush is a great way to be able to sort of keep the ball rolling. Now as we come down here, maybe things are going to get a little bit more burnt sienna. I used burnt sienna on this area around the eye. So that starts mixing in a little bit with our previous color. And I don't think I want to do too much more there. I want to keep a lot. I don't even care if it's the white of the paper there. I want to keep that side especially white. It will kind of disappear into the background until I get a background in. So I want to come over to this area over on the back. Let's zoom out again. Okay, so this area on the back, okay, so this area on the back here seems a little bit too light. I really don't want a lot of detail in there though, so because that's further away and I want it to look further away. So I'm going to brush some dampness onto my paper here. You'll see me sometimes leaning to the side, and that's so that I can see that shine on the surface. That's something I'm always looking for in my watercolors. How much shine is on the surface? And, you know, it gets to be a habitual thing, and you will eventually be looking for that and be able to know when the right time is. It takes practice if you haven't done it in the past, but it will be a really useful tool for you. Now that's a little dark, so let's blot that and blend that a little bit. And she has very, very curly kind of coat. It's the little bit of poodle in her. And this is my sister-in-law's dog. I asked what kind of breed she is, and apparently she's a little bit of everything. A little bit poodle, a little bit Bernese Mountain Dog, and several other mixtures in there. So, but she's quite a nice dog. You can see that what I'm doing is I'm trying to maintain that little bit of a lighter area through here. But I'm not looking for detail. This is further back and it's out of focus. It's not a focal point, so let's just keep it gentle. Now I'm starting to lose my shine, which means I may have to dampen again. not too wet. If you go in too wet, you will end up creating blossoms. So it is something that you have to practice a little bit to get the hang of. If you did get a blossom, blot your brush, pick up the excess moisture, and then continue. Just know it right away that you have put down too much moisture. You'll know right away. You'll be able to see the blossom starting to form. So just brush gently over it with this blotted flat brush, and you'll be able to pick that up. And that goes for pretty much any strokes that you're putting on wet paper. So let's say, for example, I put down some strokes here and they're too dark, right? Those are standing out too much. So I take my blotted brush and I just gently brush over them, and they calm right down. So I don't have to wait for it to dry and fix it then. I can do it as I'm going along. So I'm just taking a look here at the the chat. Looks like everybody's getting a little bit of snow, and we have sunshine, but a lot of wind. We've had a very windy week. So I'm going to just continue with a little bit more darkness here. One thing about keeping a little bit of darkness at the edges, it kind of keeps your eye from escaping. If it's white, think of an open door to the outside. That's like an exit, right? It's like an exit, and if you have lightness all at the edges of your painting, it feels like, oh, I can go out there, and that won't keep your eye in the painting. So a little bit of vignette around your painting can be a really helpful thing. So I'm talking too much, not enough painting, so I've got to keep dampening here. Let's try this again. Very little in my brush, by the way. You can see I hardly have anything on my brush, because on a wet surface it will really move. And I'm trying to build in smaller increments, not hit it too boldly. Add a little more on the ear here. And I'm fluctuating between some of these colors here to make it maybe a little bit more blue, a little bit more red, or a little bit more raw sienna. A little more golden, perhaps. But I can strengthen a few of the shadows here, or some of the dark areas through here. Darkening areas makes highlights look even brighter. Pick up just a touch more of that neutral tint. I don't have very much of that in there, so I'm struggling a little bit to get it a little darker. So that seems to be a little bit more grayed down, which is what I'm looking for. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the approach that I've taken to creating the dog. I did work a little bit on the eyes here. I found that this eye I didn't have this eye quite right, so I fiddled with it a little bit last week. I lifted a few areas just with a blotted brush. I lifted, moved things as I needed, and it's getting a lot closer now. There's certainly some things that need a little more toning down, some darks in here, that sort of thing. I'll fuss with that at the end, but not now. And the nose, I wanted to get the pink in the middle. I got a little bit of this same coloring here around the outer part of the nose, and I started giving a little bit more definition to that. Now there's this little texture, I guess, to the nose. It's almost like little bumps. And if you take a look, let's take a close look here at the nose. In fact, I'll just zoom in as I work on this nose. Oops, wrong way, sorry. There we go. So I'll zoom in here as I work on this nose, and I'm looking for, I've established where the darks are, because once you start putting texture on, it's really hard to find your pencil lines. So for this nose, you can see that there's this bumpy kind of texture on there. And because the nose is wet, we've got a little bit of sparkly bits on the under part of the nostril. That, again, I had mentioned last week that I would use a little bit of white paint in the end for certain little touches like that. I can mask it off at the beginning, but I thought it would just be a little easier to add it in with some white at the end. It's such a small increment. All right, so I need to get my pinks a little bit stronger, so I'm still using some of that combination. Try to keep my palette pretty consistent, but I want to come in here and I'm going to dampen this just to keep it soft. I'm dampening just, I don't want it to bleed outside of the nose, so I'm going to dampen just where I'm going to be working, and then I can create the roundness of the nose. So a little bit more strength of color in some of these areas. Texture is going to be the last thing. A lot of people just are eager to get that texture in, but as soon as you do, then it's really hard to adjust your values. So finish getting the values as you need them, and then add that texture on. That's my recommendation. So I'm going into my neutral tint here. There is a little darkness around the outer perimeter of the nose, and a little dip there, like a little widow's peak kind of thing. And I'm going to get a little bit more blending happening here with my brush. But everything's still, I'm still working on a nice damp surface, so I'm able to really sort of work and create the roundness. If I have any hard lines, there's going to be some strange angles that will appear in the nose. So working in small increments, building up your values in a manageable way will make it a lot easier to create these forms. Now right here under the nose, under the nostril, we've got some dark there. All right, so I'm getting, I think, closer to the values. So maybe a little more down in here. And then, of course, I'm going to have to reestablish the nostrils. They do need to be quite dark. Karen's asking, what's her name? This dog's name is Maggie. So we are painting Maggie today. Keep in mind when you are working on wet paper that things are going to dry an awful lot lighter. Lighter than they do normally on dry, when you paint watercolor on dry paper. So they will dry even lighter still. All right. So I'm going to just quickly dry this so that I can come in on dry now. Now that my values are pretty well established, I think I can do that. Could use maybe a little bit more down there. But okay, so now with my neutral tint, I'm going to reestablish the darkness in this nostril. And there's one side that is got a harder edge than the other. So you can see this edge is crisper than this edge. This one kind of fades. So that makes it not look like a flat surface that somebody's drilled into. It will look like it's actually rounded into that nostril. So I'm working on dry. So I need one hard edge. So that means I need to work on dry. And then I'm going to blot my brush and soften the other edge that I need. All right, so blot my brush, soften this right away before the paint sets. Looking a little small, so I'll put a little more in there. So I end up with one crisp edge and one soft edge. The other nostril, we don't notice that so much. So it's also not a mirror image of what's on the left side. Yes, they are a similar shape, but I don't have the softened edge like I do on the other side. Maybe a little bit here at the lower edge. I might have a little softening there. And so I will work little increments like this, and let me just finally show you the nose texture, which I will do with a very small brush, which I haven't grabbed yet. I'm just drying what I have, and I'm going to look for a small brush. This will do. Okay, so far I've been using mostly a number 6 synthetic round or an 8 if you're working in a larger area. This is going to be a 0 liner brush. A nice long point to it. And I'm going to pick up a little bit of that neutral tint. My advice, don't do this step too dark. In fact, the neutral tint could have a little permanent rose added to it because the nose is so pink. So I'm going to add a little permanent rose to it and thin it a fair bit. So I end up with that little bit of a purple color. Basically, very thin paint, I can create the nose texture here. Little circles. Now, you can get as detailed as you want on the face. And on the facial features, I don't mind creating a lot of really fine detail in these areas. But as I get away from the focal point and I start to get into like the dog's back and things like that, I don't want to put that detail. It's not as relevant as the face. I love this particular photo of her because it feels really intimate. It feels like I'm really up close to the dog and we're having almost a private conversation. So I like that aspect of this, this close-up shot. Marco's asking, on the last darker wash on the nose, not the nostrils, could you sprinkle salt to give the nose some texture? I would test that on a piece of paper. You could, but as I said, I'm putting a lot more detail in this really front area here. The facial features. I'm really giving a lot more attention to, and it's the other areas that are really soft and out of focus that I don't want to put the detail or anything like that to. So I hope that answers your question, but I would give it a test and see how you like the effect. I'm not sure if that's going to give me the exact texture I'm looking for, but it could give you something similar. Could very well do that. Eventually some of these lines will start breaking up because they, as they round the edge of the nose, they will start to get a little bit more kind of overlapped. Now this is a really nice fine brush. It has a great point. The bristles are long, which means I don't have to keep constantly refilling it. It's good for that. But I highly recommend that you thin down your paint for this. One error that I see quite often in from my beginners is that they want to see the detail that they're doing, so they make the line a lot darker, where they could really water it down and paint something a lot more delicate and subtle. A little too much in my brush there. Don't want it to pool. And up in here, when it starts to get in dark, you can't really see the texture. So I'm just going to hint at some of that. It's really the up front and personal that you really see the detail. As it goes around an edge into a background, then you can make things a little more obscured. It was a busy week for me. I had Watercolor Live last week. If you're not familiar with what Watercolor Live is, it is an online watercolor conference put on by Eric Rhodes and Streamline Publishing. And they had, I think there was about 20 or so artists that gave demonstrations, and boy, what an honor to be among some of the big names that were there. It was really quite a privilege. So that is watercolorlive.com, and this particular week they launched my new video, which was excellent. My new video is on painting glass, sparkling glass, in fact. So you can check out watercolorlive.com. You can also check out Streamline Publishing and find out about my new video if you're so inclined. It's a longer, professionally made video. I flew to Austin during the pandemic, actually, to film it. Kind of fun to be in an actual studio, film studio, not my studio, but an actual film studio with camera people and stuff. was very, very exciting. But what a marathon. Wow, you get so much information. It's almost information overload. One of their expressions is it's like filling a teacup with a fire hydrant. It just is so much information. But you get the replays, and that's a good thing. All right, I'm almost done here with all these little circly things on the nose to give that unique texture. Down here, you really kind of stop seeing that shape. It doesn't become as evident as you come further down the nose. So I'm just gonna maybe just put a couple of dashes or dots in there just to show the texture, but not really define it. Now you can see I spent a little time working on that, right? So this is the sort of time that I would spend on my, my larger paintings, like the ones I have behind me that are far more detailed. In a Wednesday morning demo, there's a limit to how much I can actually show without boring you to tears. So I'm just about done here, and we're going to move on because I want to talk about this background, because it is so important to get a background right when you are doing an animal, especially a soft animal like this little girl. And we're going to get into that in just a moment. So in past live demos, I've also asked, what do you want to see? What do you want to see on a Wednesday morning in 2025? Put your ideas in chat, because I actually do make notes of all of these requests. This one was a request as well, but you can see now it's got this, it's almost like what do you call it? A snakeskin type of texture, or a reptilian type of texture on the nose. It's definitely different than the fur, so let's zoom out and see how it's coming together. All right. I think maybe before I exit this, no, I'm gonna carry on here. Let's just zoom right out here. I want to look at the background. There we go. Okay, so let's take a look at this background, because we've got a lot of patterning going on here. Lots and lots of patterning. I could really pay attention to all of that. I could really put in all of this pattern and everything that's on this fabric. But I definitely, on the background, I really want to keep this a lot simpler. This is a couch, this is a cushion, and so on. And I know what that is, but the viewer really doesn't need to know. It would just, to put in that much detail in the background would just take away from our main subject. So I've just lost the scroll button on my chat. There we go. Okay. All right, so yeah, sometimes it stops on me. It's really weird, but I want to make sure I'm not missing any questions. Thank you, Linda. Linda was in the Watercolor Live event. It was a lot of fun, and Linda happens to be hosting my live demo, my in-person demo, in Pennsylvania in June of 2025. Maybe Linda would like to add that information to the chat area. Let me. Okay, so scrolling down here, make sure I want to get all of that. West is bringing the photos. Yes. Oh, thank you. Okay. And yes, white is one of the topics we're going to be talking about when I'm doing my demos in Pennsylvania. So this is one way, and but I have more tricks up my sleeve. So let's talk about this background. I want to think about my background color. I like this sort of reddish color, this reddish brown color, because it does blend in so with all the warm tones of the dog. So I'm going to take let's get a big brush here. I'm going to get a great big round brush here, a mop type brush, so I can mix a good quantity of color. I'm going to use the puddle I have here, and I'm going to add more permanent rose and burnt sienna. Permanent rose and burnt sienna. If I bring some cobalt into that, it might turn a little bit purple, so I need a little more burnt sienna. I want to dull it a little bit, so I'm playing around with the ratios of color to see until I get the right mix. Like if it looks too red, you might want to put in a little more burnt sienna or a little bit more blue, and so on. That's not too bad. That will dry a little duller though. I want to mix up a good quantity of this. I think I might hint at some of the patterning in the fabric here. So I'm also going to mix up some of the, I'm going to call this raw sienna. Raw sienna there. And I think that mostly covers it. There are going to be a few darker areas. I'll take some neutral tint off to the side here just to introduce that where I'd like to have it a little bit darker. Morning in. All right, so let's talk about adding this in without making the dog look like it's got a cardboard cutout edge. Some of you may have already guessed, but I'm wetting the paper again. So I'm going to take a big brush. And since it's a big area, I could actually take a really big brush. I've got this one, which is good. This will do the job. But I'm going to grab this one because this is a really big one. So make sure what you've got is dry and set. Once you dry your colors, as long as you're not brushing around too much or soaking it too much, those colors will stay and you'll be fine. So I have to move my photo out of the way here because I'm going to get things wet. And I'm going into my clean water container and I'm going to brush water all over my background. I'm going to do the background first, then I'll focus on this armchair, the arm of the chair. I'm coming over the dog as well. All right, so let's blot this and make this only damp here around the dog. So not soaking wet. Now I'm picking up a little bit of that moisture so that it's not going to rush into where the dog is. Let's try this out. Take a deep breath. Let's see how far it's going to spread. So you can see it's going in this direction more because of that area is getting a little wetter outside of where the dog is. So let's carve in some of the texture here. Make a few little tufts on her fur. I'm going to use the side of the brush and just blend that out. I'm going to let that just kind of disappear a little bit. Okay, that's a little fluff or something. I did manage to get it out, but if you're struggling with a fluff or something in your paint, my recommendation is just wait till it's dry. It'll pull right out. You're really using the point of this large brush here. And I don't mind this sort of dappled background. In fact, if I wanted to put just a general, like a model-y kind of background, I could just blot my brush and make a few brush marks in there on purpose. And I'll just get something very soft and gentle. But you can see my paper. You can see a little bit of shine here. You can see it's still wet. But around this area, it's only damp. And how I'm getting the control around the outer edges here. I also want you to notice, it looks really awkward because I got my whole arm in here, but I'm working around this in this direction rather than trying to do it this way, because I'm trying to shape those little tufts of fur coming out. Hair. I guess if it's a poodle and it doesn't shed, then it's considered hair, right? You dog experts can correct me on that, but I think that's the way it is. It's getting a little darker over here, so let's put a little bit of that neutral tint into it. Just get this a little darker here. Really emphasize, exaggerate the highlights on the face. So look at the top. It's got a nice soft look to it, right? So that's important to get that softness. Oop, I'm getting into some dry paper here, which is actually where the arm of the chair is, but I can put that straight line in there. Let's model that out there. Just blend that out a little bit. Okay. Edges on this. Okay. Phew. All right, now I think I'm going to have to go a little darker with this because that's going to end up just pink. It's going to be so light because I'm working on damp paper. If I were working on, pardon me, if I were working on dry paper, this would dry lighter, but not near as light as when I'm working on wet paper. But things are going to start drying pretty quick, which means I've got to be quick. It's a little scary, right? But I've always got this to help me. Look at that. I was able to rescue that crisp edge with the same brush I used earlier for softening this fur. So don't panic. There's almost always something you can do. All right, looking a little crisp. Let's take care of that. I'm going to rinse off this brush. Blot it gently, quickly. And just with the corner, can you see the corner of my brush there? I'm just hitting the edges there. Don't brush into it or brush out of it. Just that I'm just using the corner of my brush. Not like this, okay? Flat. And I'm hitting that paint, and that's making that edge look just dreamy and soft. That's what I wanted to do. I'm going to keep going here because it's time's a wasting while it's drying, and I will answer that question, Janet. I'm going to, Janet's asking if I'm going to be bringing this palette with me. I honestly don't know yet, but I might. It is my go-to palette for most things. And it is lightweight enough that I can travel with it. Going a little darker in here, adding a little neutral tint to the mixture. But don't let these edges dry completely before you come in and deal with the softness. And one other thing you should be remembering is how much paint will keep crawling on a damp surface. So if, for example, if I came right up to my lines, my dog's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller as that background keeps creeping in. So something to keep in mind. So my pencil line is right here. So I'm stopping my paint before I hit that line. All right, dampen my brush and give it a blot. Let's hit the edges of that fur with the corner of my brush. My brush is laying flat on the clean part. I may have to rinse it again. If the paint starts crawling down too far, you may have to rinse it a second time. But there we go. We have a much softer edge. All right, let's soften up this edge a little bit here. If you don't blot your brush, you're going to totally make a blossom here. Make sure you blot your brush pretty well. All right. Okay. So we'll let this dry while I answer a couple of questions. Some of this that you see here, that is shine from the light. Okay, so it is actually a little bit darker. And as it dries, you'll see that that is not a light spot that I left there. Okay. Lynn says, my paper towel has a similar pattern as a nose. I lightly dampened it with some thin paint and left the imprint. And that's an interesting way of doing it. But yeah, it's like a subtractive type of approach to it. If your paper towel has a similar texture, a very gentle little touch, and you can leave the imprint of that pattern onto a texture like that. The one thing you can't do is sort of fade it off into the darker areas, but yeah, if it gets you the results you want, that could work. Okay, Margot, I used basically the same color. I added some more permanent rose and neutral tint. Or sorry, permanent rose and burnt sienna. I also had some neutral tint to darken this side a little bit more. Now, I may end up re-wetting this and adding more to it, but I have to be really careful if I'm doing that, because if I were to do that, I would end up, I could end up transferring the background color into the dog's face. So I have to be really careful not to wet the dog if I re-wet this area. All right, so if it dries too light, which for many of you it will, because it's always a bit of a surprise how light things get when it dries, when you're working on wet paper. So just be really careful. Don't get the dog wet. All right, don't get it wet. You can get it a little damp, but don't get it wet. And watch your brush. You know, if you brush right through like this, for sure you're taking paint from here and you're going to smear it across. We're building up some color, a fair bit of color here, so it will transfer more easily. Lynn is asking, you can do anything, almost any subject on the go with the palette I use. Yes, because it's a full color wheel, and it doesn't have to be in a round format. Yeah, you can lay it out like a color wheel in your rectangular palette just as easily and work in the same sort of way. Yeah, so yeah, I would say that my go-to colors are cobalt and cerulean for my blues, permanent rose and rose d'or for my reds, gamboge and aureolin for my yellows. All right, warm cool of each of those. Then I have a couple of neutrals. So I have raw sienna, burnt sienna, and a couple of darks, neutral tint, and Payne's gray. And I would say I do the lion's share of my painting with those colors only. So if you had those colors, I can paint pretty much anything. I can mix any of those colors. It's much better, in my opinion, to have a shorter, smaller number of paints and learn to mix than to have every convenience color going. But like everybody else, I go to the store and I see this color and it's so pretty and I just want to get it. Then I find a use for it, kind of thing. I do find my background a little bit flat, like just a little bit uninteresting at the moment. I think what I would like to do is finish up my arm here, including some of the pattern, and then I will address that background. Give it a chance to dry, and so that when I don't move my paint around too much. The paint I've already done, that is. Okay, so I'm getting this dry. And this is the arm of the chair. Why would I want to soften that? It's because it's not a focal point. As soon as you have a hard edge, you will draw attention to a spot. It's the way we're hardwired. As soon as we see a crisp edge or contrast, that's where our eye goes. That's why we put the detail in the eyes and the nose and the mouth. That's the face. That's where we're telling the viewer to look. I mean, even if I had a whole scene in behind this, much bigger background, for example, and the dog was in a room with other people and guests and things like that, or other dogs, or out in a garden, or whatever the case may be. If I want the focus on the dog, that's where I'm going to put the crisper lines, the higher contrast. And this being a white dog, of course, that makes it kind of easy, because the dog is so white and the eyes are so nice and dark. I do see I need to do a little bit up in here. I can see little things I need to fuss and adjust, but I'll spend time doing that a little later. maybe in my own time. But okay, so I'm thinking about the pattern of this sofa here, and I'm going to wet the area and put it in damp. Okay, so I'm going to take my big brush again, clean water. Now, how am I going to keep this from making a blossom? Just not have it too wet. It can be wet down here in the corner, but as I get closer to what I've already painted, I really have to watch that I'm blotting. Let me just grab this. I blot this big brush and not moving that around too much. Again, I'm coming into the dog's face and the dog's fur, except this edge here. I think this edge here, I can keep that one kind of crisp. I think I did wet it in the background, but not very much. All right, so now I have damp, and once again, I'm leaning over to see how much shine I have on the paper, just to show you. Okay, that's how much shine I have on the paper. I'm going to take this number 8 round, and I'm going to take a little bit of this raw sienna. And I'm not going to try to draw it too specific. I want to keep this pretty loose. Once again, I don't want this to be the focal point. So I'm looking, it comes pretty close over here in the corner, and it comes to about here. Once again, I don't have a drawing, so if I look from the eye, that's the middle of the flower. Okay, that's where that ends up being. So that tells me I'm bringing this golden mark here to that point. Okay, right about where my finger is. And need more color than that. Oh, I just splashed myself. Right here. A loose interpretation. I mean, you can only do it loosely anyway because we're working on wet, and my brush is not overly wet, because if it were, I would have zero control on this damp surface. My voice is quitting on me today. I feel fine. I just not getting the words out without crackling. Okay, so trying to get this, just the general idea of this pattern here. And a little bit here. Doesn't need to be literal. It just needs to be the idea. Okay, so there's the pattern. Nothing too earth-shattering. All right, let's come in with my chair color now. I guess I've got a little bit of a gold piece here too. I'm keeping this brush handy because I'm going to be rinsing and softening edges as I go, like here and here. But I gotta work fast here. I could also just dry that first layer and then I could re-wet. but I am working fast here. I'm just going to have to press along here because I don't have the luxury of waiting and taking my time, because the paper's going to give me crisp lines and I'll have no control at that point. But I really want to pay attention right here. This is a very important spot. Since it's an important spot, I'm going to blot my brush and make sure this little spot is damp, because that's where the dog's fur is again. But I'm gonna see if I can just tickle a little bit of this so that it doesn't end up having a bunch of hard lines here or weird lines. Trying to stay on the gold as much as possible, because as soon as I bring the red into the gold starts disappearing. Those little areas get shrunken. So all right. Making sure this is damp. I recommend that, if you're trying this for the very first time, do it in small increments. Maybe just do a little bit. Maybe this is as far as you get and you're having a little bit of a panic attack. So what I would suggest is just stop and dry it and then re-wet it and keep going. Some of those golds are hardly showing. Let's put a little bit more in there. There. I'm going to establish these a little more. Okay, if you get a hard edge, just blot your brush, soften it on the fly. Right? These ones are all soft because that paper was pretty damp in there. There we go. All right, so we're going to continue on. It is a plastic palette, Janet, to answer your question. Paint's too wet, so it's bleeding where I don't really want too much bleeding, so I have to be a little bit mindful here. I want to cover up all those gold bits, so I have to paint around stuff. Leave a few of those gaps. So I'm kind of painting in the white areas that I didn't paint previously with the gold. And yeah, there's a lot more pattern to this than meets the eye, but I don't want to put it all in. It's not that important to me, right? It's more a matter of, well, let's get the dog the focal point and make the sofa less important. So we're putting it out of focus, putting less detail into it and all of that sort of thing. I'm leaving those little bits in there. Just suggesting some of this stuff. Let the viewer figure it out. More soft fur there. A little bit of a hard line. Blot my flat brush. Let's deal with that edge. There we go. It's nice and soft again. Now this is getting quite dry up in here. So let's just come in and soften that with the same brush. So I'm going to take this same flat brush. I'm hardly touching the paper when I do this. Just put it along there. Let that color bleed a little bit. There we go. So we get the idea of the couch without a lot of extreme detail. This is a very uncomfortable way to paint for a lot of you. But you got to get outside your comfort zone to really find out what watercolor can really do. Mostly what I've done here is I've let the watercolor be a watercolor. I'm really taking advantage of the fact that it flows on the paper. And so I'm really putting a lot of emphasis on that. A little bit of a crisper edge here. I don't know if I can soften it now because I think it's getting pretty dry, but I'm going to try. It's not too bad. There's a couple of stray hairs there. That's pretty close to the face. Okay, so things are looking nice and soft. I think I would like to maybe revisit and maybe just darken this just a touch more in the background. I didn't put any of the pattern back there. I thought, well, I'll just leave it as is. But I'm liking it just sort of like, you know, there's imperfections. I want to zoom in on this so you can see that it's not as polished as what you might think. All right, it's definitely not. I know when you are looking at your own and you're looking at it and thinking, ooh, I don't like this little fuzzy edge and I don't like that little spot. Oh, I missed a spot. You see all those things and you think, oh no, I've ruined it. You haven't. Those little things, believe it or not, are sometimes one of the most beautiful parts of your painting. All right, so let's try coming in and just, I'm going to build up a little bit closer to the dog in a couple of spots. Any warmth to the body shadow? Yeah, probably. I could bring some more warmth in, like here, for example. I could bring a little bit of this same warm color into the dog. We were using quite a bit of red and purples in here, so let's try introducing a little bit of this background color to the ear area, for example. So I'm going to brush over this, clean water. Just stamp. Remember, don't get it too wet. This is some of the background color that I used, and I can glaze over top. So for those of you, you can shift a color by glazing, putting a little bit of another color on top and changing it up. So I've just brought a little bit of that warmth into her ear. I can bring some of that warmth into her back even. wetting the face first because I don't want to transfer any of this background color into the face. So I'm wetting this first with my brush while it's clean. Now I can go from the dog out. If I go this way, oh, bad news. That will be a bad thing. My audio's going in and out. Oh dear, that's not good. I think that might be YouTube. According to my recording device or my streaming device, it looks like my mic is working just fine. So it might be just YouTube. Not sure. Okay, so I've re-wet my background without disturbing the dog. Okay, very important. Start where the light area is here and get that wet first and then do your background. Don't wipe right across. Okay, so I'm going to come in and bring a little bit more color into a couple of spots. I do the little negative painting around the dog with the point of my brush. I like this kind of a brush that has a big fat belly and a nice point. Splashed on her face. All right, so I wanted to get this kind of connected a little bit better as well. So this will give me the chance to do that. I've always seen a lot of other videos on painting this kind of softness, and it's always mystified me. And because when I see it, it's always a sped up video or something and no explanation. So it took a while for me to sort of work out exactly what was happening and how they were achieving this kind of a soft edge around the outer edges of things. You know, a cat or an animal of any kind for that matter. But okay, so I'm going to come down into the couch area again because I want those to kind of mingle together a little bit better. Now this is dry down here, so what am I going to do? I'm going to have to soften this, right? It's very, oh, I don't want to do that on blue. Let's blot it here. Let's soften that. I am rinsing my brush frequently here so that I don't have, I'm not transferring any color. There. So now that kind of blends together a little bit more, and we really see the dog's face. Make sure my edges, keeping an eye on these edges all the time is very important. And just make sure you are blotting your brush well when you are softening these edges. You're going to be mad at me if you forget to do it and I told you to do it and you didn't blot well enough. So I really want to emphasize when you go back to soften your edges, make sure that this brush isn't really wet. You're going to have blossoms galore in your background. So I need to do a little more on the dog. Now I can see that. I can see that I need a little bit more. So how are we doing for time? We're doing okay. Let's rinse this one out, make sure it's nice and clean. Okay, I want to come back into some of these areas and bring that expression out a little bit more. I want to come in with a few more darks around the eyes and things like that. Keeping it soft. Back to my small brush, and I'm going to go into my burnt sienna. Actually, I'm going to mix that background color and a bit of neutral tint for this area. You can see that the eye area looks like it's set back more in shadow when I darken this. And that's what I'm trying to achieve here, is the feeling that that is receding. And so I need to make sure that I am getting that dark enough in there, almost to the point where the eye's hard to see. Now that's a little bit concave, and so it recedes and has darker edges here. Might soften a few of them. Instead of softening them with the flat brush, I'll just use this same round brush and just soften with this brush while the paint's still nice and fresh. And I should get a pretty soft look here. All right, so I need to do more of that, because now that I have that dark enough, it looks like she's got a patch on her eye. So we need to balance that off with other areas of building up values. It's always surprising once you put a background in, it's like, especially on a white dog, you're going to see, wow, I didn't put much color down there in the first place. And that's a normal part of the process. Out here in the light, I don't want to dull my color too much, so I'm going to go mostly with burnt sienna on this one. A touch of that red in there too. All right, so all these lines are softening pretty nicely because the paper's damp. If any of it's too hard, I take my clean blotted brush. I guess it's painting sometimes a little bit like gardening. You've got to be patient. Well, you don't have to be. You can paint really fast. But to get this sort of softness and realism, you know, with some control, it would be great to slow it down. So where else can I work? I can just keep building. I'll try to build up a little bit around this mouth area, because I want to come in and show you what I'm going to do with the white paint in the end. All right, so once again, I can bring a little bit of that background color into these areas, glazing in a bit of that nice warm color. Bit of a hard line there. So. If you're putting your strokes down and they're just fuzzy as anything, it's probably because your brush is too wet or your paper's also too wet. Things are too wet, basically. So wait for things to get damp and you'll have that wonderful brief moment of being able to work with some control. But if you get it wrong, you can always take your dampened brush and give it a little gentle tickle. That wind is howling out there. This is a good day for painting. Try to get a few of those shadows built up a little bit more. The stickier my paint in my brush, like the drier my brush is, the darker I can get that color. I'm trying to do it without too much hard edge stuff happening there. All right, so I think you've got the idea of that. I'm going to, yeah, it could be the wind is causing interference with the sound. But I'm going to take my white paint now. Let me just grab that. I like using Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. It's a nice opaque white, and so I don't have to keep applying it to get it dark enough. You do have to use white paint a little thicker than your typical watercolor. So I'm using my fine brush now. And I just want to get a little, a couple of little specks on here which will make the nose look wet. You can also blot it with your paper towel if it's too much. There's a little bit there, there's a little bit up in here. A little bit of shine on that nose. And of course, we need the white in the eye, the sparkle. I kind of avoided painting it, but it's not as bright as it could be. So I want to get this nice crisp highlight here. By the way, this would be one of the very last things you do, because if you add white paint to your watercolor, it's like putting cream in coffee. And you won't get it out again, right? It'll just be there and you'll keep trying to fix it and it's just going to get worse. Watch what happens in my water container. You see that kind of looks like a dark Kool-Aid, but I have a little bit, only a little bit of white paint on my brush. And you can see the milkiness that it creates in the water. Now that's highly diluted. You can imagine just a little, if you were painting around this, that white's going to move like crazy. All right, where else can I put a little bit of this? Oh, a little bit on the whiskers. Yeah, these whiskers in here. Now this, I better make sure this is dry. want to separate that ear too, because that part of the face isn't that wide. That's actually the other ear there. But using my long liner brush here. Now I negative painted around a lot of this, so a lot of it's implied anyway, but I could definitely show the whiskers overlapping the mouth a bit better. Even down here in the chin, I want to show some of those whiskers moving into the chin area. Give me a little bit of a definition around the mouth, that sort of thing. Let's zoom in so you can see it. All right, so you can see I'm adding in this. And as long as you mix it somewhere else, you can actually add color to this too. So if stark white isn't what you're after and you just need a lighter creamy color, for example, mix some of your creamy color into the white and that makes it opaque. There we go. So that's starting to look a little better. Always follow that curve of the fur, the direction of the hair growth, that sort of thing. Even up here in the eyebrows, you might have the occasional little stray hair there. And this eye in the shadow is really kind of getting a little lost. I can detail that a little bit better, make it a little bit more crisp. I dampened it so many times, the eye got quite blurry. So let's get that a little bit more in focus. Making sure I get the shape right here. There, a little bit easier to see that eye. I don't want to see it too much. It is in shadow. Okay, so I think she's really getting there, and I have a few things that I'm going to fiddle and fuss with a bit. So the bit on the ear here, for example, I just would like to see a little bit more there to separate her ear from the side of her face. That type of thing, right? So that we have a clear definition between her ear and her face. There we go. And I think that's probably all I need to cover in terms of how to go about it. Now it's just a matter of fussing. So let's take a look and see if there's any more questions or comments here that I need to address. Does using the Dr. P.H. Martins turn the piece into a mixed media? No. Yes and no. This actually says it's called opaque watercolor. Now, to me, opaque watercolor is essentially gouache, but this does say opaque watercolor. And so depending on your definition of pure watercolor or mixed media, I guess that's all up to interpretation. There are some institutes, if you were entering something into a competition where they will allow small bits of this, like a lot of people will sign their name, for example, with this, or add details, much as I've done. When you exceed a certain percentage, like if you're putting a lot of it on there, that's generally frowned upon by most watercolor societies. But most are pretty forgiving in terms of using it in small amounts. All right, let me see if I've missed any other questions here. I'm glad Lorraine says I've given her the confidence to try it. Well, that's excellent. I'd love for you to try that. You can pick something like a cat or anything like that, a different dog, anything you want. But the technique would be the same in order to keep it soft. But the idea of dampening an area, painting into it with very little paint, will give you control and softness at the same time. Very elusive otherwise. If you don't know how to go about it, then that can be a real mind bender, how to approach it. But dampening it first will really help with that. Boy, a lot of you are having sound problems. I wonder if this is something on YouTube. Or like you said, the wind, it's very windy today. It could be affecting the internet. Hopefully on the replay, all of my sound is intact. Aside from the beginning, that was my fault, but I'm going to remove that little segment at the beginning. So so I guess some of you are in areas where you're in and out of sound. Can I speed stretching paper with a hairdryer instead of waiting overnight? You could. I don't see any compelling reason why you wouldn't be able to do that. The only thing is that it has to, I like the even drying where it's drying right through to the back. This is the question here. Can you speed stretching paper with a hairdryer instead of waiting overnight? You can. The idea of stretching it is to shrink it. And if you use a dryer, you're drying only the front. It's not necessarily drying the back. You'd have to dry it for a good long time. And as long as you dry it all the way through, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work. All right, so let me see. I don't think I've skipped over too many questions here. I hope I haven't. Nope, the wind's still howling here, just like a lot of places. It's been a very windy week here in the Toronto area. All right, well, since some of you are hearing sound and some of you aren't, I don't have the answer. I'm sorry. Alrighty, so let's wrap this one up. Thank you so much for joining me and for all your suggestions about what you'd like to see in future demos. I always appreciate those. And next week, let me see, I think Valentine's coming. Maybe we have to do something Valentine's related, so we'll see. But for now, have a great week. Be safe, stay warm, and see you next time. Bye.